we'll be reviewing IRS Form 8990, Limitation on Business Interest Expense under Section 163J, which has been changed since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to allow only a certain amount of business interest expense to be deducted in a given tax year. And then if the amount of interest expense exceeds that limitation, it must be carried forward to a future tax year. So if Section 163J, which primarily applies to partnership income, the business interest expense deduction that's allowed for the tax year is limited to the sum of 1. Business interest income, 2. 30% of the adjusted taxable income, and 3. Floor plan financing interest expense. So the amount of any business interest expense that is not allowed as a deduction under the current tax year is carried forward to the following tax year as a disallowed business interest expense carry forward. There are special rules that may apply for partnership treatment of this expense, which the IRS form instructions contains additional guidance on. This form must be filed for every taxpayer with business interest expenses or a disallowed business interest expense carry forward or current year or prior year excess business expense, unless there is an exclusion that applies. Those exclusions where a taxpayer might not be required to file Form 8990 include if the taxpayer is a small business taxpayer and does not have excess business interest from a partnership. The taxpayer may also not be required to file if there's only interest expense from one or more of the following accepted trades or businesses. 1. The trade or business of providing services as an employee. 2. An electing real property trade or business. 3. An electing farming business. Or 4. Certain regulated utility businesses. So we will now go through the form itself line by line. Should note that you may need your paid tax professional to go through this form, but if you want to do this yourself, we'll go through these steps together. At the top of the form indicates your name as shown on your tax return as well as your identification number. Before we get to part 1, which is computing the allowable business interest expense, you may need to complete certain information if your reporting is related to an information return for a foreign entity. In that case, then you would enter the name of the foreign entity, employer ID number if there is one, reference ID number, and then you would answer yes, no questions on B, C, and D, whether the entity is a CFC group member, whether this was a Form 8990 filed by the specified parent group for an entire CFC group, and whether or not that group has made a safe harbor election. If any of those apply, then you should refer to the form instructions for additional detail. So there is a Schedule A and a Schedule B that you should complete before Part 1 when you are a partner or a shareholder of a pass-through entity, subject to 163J. So in Section 1, you'll enter business interest expense for the current year on line 1. On line 2, any carry forwards from prior years. Under 3, partners excess business interest expense that was treated as paid or accrued in current year. That is from Schedule A, line 44. And then, if applicable, any floor plan financing business interest expense. On line 5, you'll simply add lines 1 through 4, and that represents your current year business interest expense. Then you'll need to compare that to your adjusted taxable income. So in line 6, you'll enter the tentative taxable income as computed as though all of the business interest expense is otherwise allowable. So this might include all other limitations, section 163F, 267, basis at risk, passive activity loss, excess business loss. And this should also include separately and non-separately stated items if the tentative taxable income is for a partnership or an S corporation. Partnerships normally will report this information on Form 1065, line 1. That's net income or loss minus guaranteed payments, which you can find on Schedule K, line 4C. Any additions to this tentative taxable income will be added in lines 7 through 15. So line 7 includes any item of loss or deduction that is not properly allocable to a trade or business of the taxpayer. This also includes any loss or deduction from accepted trades or businesses. For example, a personal casualty loss is not allocable to a trade or a business. This would be entered on line 7 as a positive amount because the casualty loss offsets the tentative taxable income. On line 8, you'll include any business interest expense that is not from a pass-through entity. Line 9, you'll include the amount of any net operating loss deduction that was carried forward or carried back to the current tax year under Section 172. For line 10, enter the amount of any qualified business income deduction allowed under Section 199A. Line 11, you will not put anything into that. The IRS has reserved that for future use. Line 12, you'll include the amount of any loss or deduction items from pass-through entities, regardless of whether or not that entity is subject to Section 163J limitations. Line 13 will include any other additions. This could be capital loss carryback or carryovers. Under 14, you'll include total current year's partner excess taxable income, which you can find on Schedule A, line 44, column F. And line 15 is total current year S corporation shareholders excess taxable income, which would be on Schedule B, line 46, column C. And for line 16, you'll add the totals, and this represents the total additions to your tentative taxable income. Lines 17 through 21, we're going to total the reductions to that taxable income. So line 17 contains any item of income or gain that is not properly allocable to a trade or business of the taxpayer. So you'll see that at the top, line 7 has the same thing. Line 17 would be something that creates a reduction in that taxable income. So example from the form instructions, a gain from the sale of a personal residence would be entered on line 17 because it is not a trade. It is not a gain that is allocable to a trade or a business. Line 18, you'll include any business interest income that is not from a pass-through entity. Line 19, you'll include any income or gain that is from a pass-through entity. And then line 20, you'll include other reductions such as floor plan financing interest expense. For line 21, you will total all of these. And in line 22, you will combine lines 6, 16, and 21 to arrive at your adjusted taxable income. In section 3, you will calculate your business interest income by starting with line 23. You'll enter the amount of business interest income that was directly paid to or accrued by the taxpayer. This does not include interest income from accepted trades or businesses. For line 24, you'll enter the excess business interest income from pass-through entities, which is the total of Schedule A, line 44, column G, and Schedule B, line 46, column D. For line 25, you'll add the totals of these two income items. In section 4, we will calculate the limitations based on section 163J. So for line 26, you'll multiply the adjusted taxable income from line 22 by the applicable percentage. That percentage is 30%. During the COVID pandemic, that percentage was temporarily raised to 50% for tax years 2020 and 2021, and then it reverted back to 30% in future tax years. 27, you'll carry down the item from line 25, which is the business interest income, and then for 28, you'll carry down the floor plan financing interest expense from line 4. You'll add all of these lines together to arrive at your total limitation on business interest expense in line 29. In line 30, you will enter the smaller of either line 29 or line 5. This is your allowable business interest expense. And this is the amount of your interest expense deduction that is allowable in the current year after considering the 163J limitation. And then line 31, you'll simply subtract line 25 from line 1, or line 5. You'll subtract line 29 from line 5 to arrive at disallowed business interest expense, which is then carried forward. And this should be the number that you'll carry to line 32 of this year's tax form as well. So in part 2, we're going to cover partnership pass-through items. This part is only completed by a partnership subject to 163J, and these items below are allocated to the partners, not carried forward by the partnership. So in line 32, it contains the excess business interest expense from line 31. If you entered an amount on 32, then you do not have excess taxable income. To allocate, you can simply skip all of these and go to line 38. If you did not enter an amount on 32, then you're going to start with line 33, subtracting the sums of lines 4 and 5 from subtracting the sum of lines 4 and 25 from line 5. If it's 0 or less, then you'll enter 0. For line 34, you'll subtract line 33 from line 26. And in line 35, you'll divide line 34 by line 26. Enter this amount as a decimal. And then in 36, you'll multiply line 35 by line 22. and this represents your total excess taxable income. In line 37, you'll subtract lines 1, 2, and 3 from line 25. And if this results in a number that is 0 or less, you'll enter 0. For part 3, you'll only complete this in an S corporation subject to 163J. And these items are allocated to shareholders. So excess taxable income, starting with line 38, you'll subtract the sum of lines 4 and 25 from line 5. Line 39, you'll subtract line 38 from line 26. In line 40, you will divide line 39 by line 26. And in line 41, you'll arrive at excess taxable income by multiplying line 40 and line 22. To arrive at excess business interest income, you'll subtract the sums of lines 1, 2, and 3 from line 25. You'll see that the back of this form contains Schedule A, which is the summary of Section 163J excess items. This should be completed before completing Part 1. And then Schedule B, which is the summary of S Corporation shareholders' excess taxable income and excess business interest income. That completes this form. You can find an article that goes through each of these items step by step on our website, teachmepersonalfinance.com. Type in IRS Form 8990 in the search bar and this article should come up. Please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our articles on our website, and if you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. Thank you.